Welcome to your college-bound kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good afternoon, friends. I'm back from 6 days in the Pacific Northwest. Had an absolutely fantastic, great trip, and I'm so glad to be back. I was with 40 counselors, and we just really had a fantastic time. So the trip started when I first arrived, and once again, thank you so much. Jeff Teraday picked me up, and we spent 4.5 hours together, about two hours on UW's campus, which was an amazing experience. And then about another hour at Seattle University on that campus, which was also a great experience. And then after that, we went to Tacoma, where we spent a half day at Puget Sound, University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. And then we had a 5-hour bus ride to Walla Walla, Washington to visit Whitman College. And then another 5-hour bus ride to Reed in Portland, 75 minutes to Salem to see Willamette. And then about 45 minutes the next day to Lewis and Clark, in Portland. So 5 colleges, 5 days, 6 nights overall together. And it's just really helpful to take that bus ride to get a feel for the terrain and the distance. And so every month for the foreseeable future, I have trips like this planned. My ideal would be to be on the road a week of the month and then be stationary for the 3.5 weeks, but it's probably going to be more like 4 days on the road. Just depends on the month. There's just no substitute for a visit. There just is no substitute. Now, I know some of you are thinking, are we going to get spotlights? Well, here's the thing. We can't only cover the West Coast. So I'm doing 9 schools in California right now and 2 more to go. Have not forgot about Scripps and Harvey Mudd. I'm getting to you. It's just, we have a few things we have to do first with me taking these trips. We have some other spotlights we can plug in. For Willamette and Reed, in the last year, Sue Gordon and Miljan Trulove, Dean of Admission, VP of Enrollment, have already done interviews for those schools. So I do plan on having Director of Admission from University of Puget Sound on for an interview. I've already, in fact, secured that commitment. And I do plan on doing a spotlight at Lewis and Clark and haven't decided yet whether or not I want to do a spotlight or an interview with the VP enrollment for Whitman. But some of those are going to be a little later, possibly even into 24, because we've got lots of colleges in other parts of the country to cover. I was supposed to be on a tour called the Beans Tour. It's a Boston tour the end of April. And I'd been holding off not doing a lot of East Coast spotlights because of that tour coming up, but it happened to be the same time I'm at the SACAC conference in Jacksonville, where I'll be visiting Florida schools, so I couldn't do that. But there are a lot of schools that we want to get to in other parts of the country, so we'll be sure to bring you the feedback. I have very detailed notes, but thankful to God, really, really, really exciting trip. So at the end of 307, I said I was going to do something special. In fact, I said I'm going to share some very important information that you probably have not heard anywhere else. And so I want to make do on that promise. It has to do with the field of enrollment management. And the topic is predictive modeling, also known as predictive analytics. Now, this is something I've talked about a little bit here and there, but not in as much depth as I want to talk about now and in the future. It's probably the big, massive thing that's happening behind the scenes that is talked about so infrequently. And it has to do with how colleges get their class. Now, a lot of times when I've talked about predictive modeling, predictive analytics, I've talked about it in the context of schools using sophisticated data to determine who they're going to admit and who they're going to waitlist. And that does happen, but that's only part of it. I think that tends to give maybe a bit of a pejorative nuance to it. At least when people hear that, it has a little yuck factor. Although I think if you were in the shoes, if you were in the same shoes that the schools were in, I think you'd probably understand it a lot more. But what I want to say here is that there's lots of other uses of predictive modeling, and everybody pretty much does it. Now, here's a way of thinking of it. If you've got a 17 or 18-year-old, I'm sure you think it's really hard to know what my 17 or 18-year-old is going to do, right? Hands up. Everybody agrees. Well, think about if you have to enroll a class of 5,000 17 or 18-year-olds, or 500, or 300, or 1,200. Predicting their behavior is really, really, really tough. And so you need to use some method of doing it. And so this is where predictive modeling, predictive analytics comes in. So there's multiple uses for it. Some schools don't do a whole lot of analytics on the front end in terms of using it to determine who they're going to admit and who they're going to waitlist. However, once the decisions have been made, they will really go to using their analytics to figure out who is likely to come, who they should target their energy toward when it comes to following up with, because the statistics and the math modeling all indicate that this student has a higher probability than this student of coming. Some schools use it because in order to balance their budget, they have to get a certain amount of net tuition revenue. And so they need to use it in order to figure out how can we balance our books and bring in the right combination of kids on aid and kids that can pay so that we balance our books. And so some people use it that way. And then some people, I would say pretty much every college that I know of, I've never talked to anyone that's not using some system of predictive analytics when it comes to how do we get the right number of heads and beds. Okay. I used to say butts and seats, but I'd like heads and beds better. I mean, you got to get the right number of heads and beds. You got 1,200 freshman dorm rooms. Like they got to be full. You can't bring in 1,300 or 1,500, and you also can't bring in 950. So pretty much everybody's using it. If you heard my interview with Greg Roberts at UVA, Dean of Admission, VP of Enrollment, he was very candid. He said, we over-enrolled by 4%, and I got to get better at this. He said, I'm bringing internal data and analytics right into our office because we have to find a better way of getting this number right. So I don't want people to look at predictive modeling, predictive analytics as a pejorative, as a negative. It's absolutely essential to do your job. What I've been doing is I've been having conversations with a lot of senior leaders around the country to figure out how they do it, what's working, what's not working. And this is a kind of a conversation that is usually not something that they're going to share publicly. And I'm not quoting anybody. You will not hear me quote anybody. But I can talk about what I'm hearing from them and pass it on to you. And I plan on coming back to this topic again. So here's some of the interesting things I'm learning. One is there is a big debate right now amongst admission officers about which method is best. And the methods pretty much fall into two camps. The first method is what is oftentimes referred to as the behavioral model of analytics. And this is probably the most common one, the one that I've talked about the most on the podcast. And so what this has to do is you analyze the behavior of students, and then you have the company that you work with assess all the data and make predictions for you. So what behaviors am I talking about? Well, I'll give you a dozen or so. One is, did the student visit? Now, you may remember when Matt Ward from Cal Lutheran came on, and he said their research shows a student is 5 times more likely to come to their school if they visited versus if they didn't. How can you ignore that if you're in enrollment management, if you have that data? Second is, did you virtually visit? And not just did you, but how often did you do it? When did you do it? All of that. What programs did you attend? Third, opens and clicks of emails. Fourth, and this one I haven't talked about a lot, but I know this is in a lot of the behavioral modeling methodology that schools that are using this use, which is portal. Do you visit the portal? How often do you visit the portal? The understanding is if you have interest in the school and they're sending you updates in the portal, you should be checking them out if you have any interest. If you're not, you're probably disinterested. 5, tracking your website behavior. Okay, where do you go on the website? When you go on the website, or do you go? 6, how often and how much time are you spending on the website? 7, Did you come by us at a fair and fill out an inquiry card? Or now they're electronic. Did you do the electronic and let them zap your information and upload it? 8, school visits. We came to your school. Did you come by? 9, did you do an interview? Obviously, not all schools have them. I'm just telling you some of the metrics that go into the behavioral model. 10, did you ever email a rep? 11, did you do very good college-specific essays? Or did you not do them if they were optional? Did you choose to do them? 12, how long have you been engaged? So I have recently had a VP of enrollment share with me that one thing that is predicting very well whether or not a student will accept their offer is if the student has been in communication with them since the 9th grade. Now, I hesitate to share that because I'm not trying to push the college process back to the 9th grade. But when I get intel like that, I feel a certain obligation to share that with you. I mean, the goal of our podcast is making college knowledge available to all. So that's some deep intel, and I like to drop it on you guys when I get it. And then a 13th thing could be what was the quality of the experience that the rep had with you at the school visit or at the fair? Not just did you come by the booth, did you have good questions? And their notes, what notes do they have from any involvement or interaction with you? So those are just 13 things that are commonly part of a behavioral model. There's more, by the way, but those are 13 common ones. So now I want to talk to you about the competitor model, which is the static model. So the way the static model is, it doesn't look at behaviors, it looks at static information. So what am I talking about here? Your grade point average, your distance from home, the size of your merit scholarship, or in the case of schools that don't give merit scholarships, how much need-based aid you got. Okay, let me talk about, there's a fourth one, but I'll talk about these three a little bit more in depth before we get into the fourth one. Why would your GPA matter? Well, schools know that they have a harder time yielding against more competition. So if it's a student that has a 3.3, and let's say a school typically takes kids from their range, the middle 50%, let's say is like a 3.2 to a 3.8, a 3.3 GPA is going to be easier to yield than a 3.8 GPA or 3.9 GPA because that student's going to have a lot more options. Distance from home. So the research shows most students go to school within an hour and a half of home. Most, actually even less than that. So when you have home court advantage, it's a lot like sports. Certainly there's a kind of student that wants to do the adventuresome thing. My kids were that way. I was that way. I wanted to go far away, at least have a different experience, but that's not what most people do. So you have an advantage in most instances if the person's closer to home than farther away. That was in particularly true during COVID, but it's not true at all times. Third, merit scholarship. I had one VP of enrollment I talked to tell me that in their research, this is the single biggest thing they find is what's the size of the merit offer. But are we coming out with a real competitive offer that's likely to stand up against the competition? So those things are a static model. However, there are a number of other factors that are used in a static model. In fact, there's a company called Watermark that is there's zillions of companies out here that do this predictive analytics, by the way. They're one of the ones that's known for advocating the static model, and they have these 14 other parent factors that get put into the static model that they feel are very predictive for the school of whether or not the student will come. So what are we talking about? Things like the zip code you're in, where the parents went to college, where kids at your kid's school go to college, and a number of other things. I haven't been able to get all 14 yet because they keep it close to the vest. But that's all part of the static model. Now, one person I talked to said, we're actually hiring a company that does a behavioral model and a static model and have them go against each other and see which one is best. Another person I talked to said, we interviewed 20 different companies that do predictive analytics, and we narrowed it down to 6. And the thing is, they like you to give them all your data and plug it in, but we don't want to give all of our data to someone when we're still trying to decide what firm to hire. So we just had to look at what their philosophy was and have them articulate it and see which one we agreed with the most. Another one told me that the problem with the predictive analytics is it's just not that accurate. Where another one told me that their old firm was not accurate, but their new firm's been very accurate. I had one tell me that the numbers are off as much as 20% either way. So if we have to bring in a class of 4,000, I mean, they could, their numbers could be up to 3,200 to 4,800. So it's just not quite that helpful. And we're paying, we're paying a lot of money. I mean, the amount of money the schools pay for this is quite considerable. So I followed up and said, well, why is it not that accurate? And two main reasons emerged. One is kids are applying to more schools. And the second is they feel like kids are getting more savvy at knowing how to mimic the behaviors that we use to track engagement that they're doing for all of their schools. So it looks to us like we think they're coming because they've had high levels of engagement, because their college coaches are sort of telling them how this stuff works, or they're listening to podcasts like this, and then we admit them and they don't come. So it's a fascinating knowing the art and science of this. And I shared with you that I'm not going to do higher ed updates this time, but I take you a little bit into the world of predictive analytics. And this is just the start. I want to come back to this topic again. I'm either going to have an expert come on. I mean, there's a company out here, and there's more than one, but one I know of that gives you like a percentage thing, like 68% chance this company comes and 13% this kid comes. There's probably quite a few that do that because there's so many companies out there, but there's one that I know that's known for doing that. And I'm thinking about arranging an interview with them because I think that'd be interesting to you. And if not, I'll give more updates on more things like this that happen behind the scenes. It's a whole science called enrollment management. And it has to do with how you shape your class and how you figure out how to get the right number of heads in beds. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. From time to time, I'm going to take a break from the higher ed updates and just share some. It's kind of like this is what I would have done on Thursday, bonus content, but I have another big bonus content coming up on Thursday. And I always want to prioritize your speak pipe questions and not have me dominate with what I think you're interested when you're sending in and telling me what you're interested in. So I'll probably end up doing both an interview and more follow-ups like this. So if you find this helpful, let me know. We're always trying to scratch where you're itching and make sure we're trying to meet your needs.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends. So there is no a speak pipe question today. We only do that when we're backed up. And then we add one on Monday and Thursday. But there's a brand new interview, and I'm really excited about it. I think you're going to like it a lot. It's with a company called Initialview, and it's our first ed tech interview that we've ever done. And it won't be our last. I want to have someone from places like Slate and others on that I haven't had, because ed tech is really impactful in this college admissions experience. But this interview has to do with how do colleges discern if who they are seeing on paper is who they're actually going to get when the student arrives. And a lot of colleges have turned to a company called Initialview to help them with their international applicants. And they're now turning to Initialview as well to help them, particularly right now with domestic applicants in this world of ChatGPT and other things. So our interview is with the founders of Initialview, Gloria and Terry Crawford, a husband and wife team. It's a 4-parter. Listen and enjoy. Friends, you're in for a treat today. I'm here with Gloria and Terry Crawford, the founders of Initialview. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Gloria and Terry.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, I have to say, I have to thank Brennan, who introduced us to each other. Brennan's like, you don't know, Terry and Gloria, they live right in Atlanta. And so he graciously treated me to some good Thai food, which will get me every time. And we decided to do this podcast. And I think the timing's really great because of all that's going on in the news. So why don't you start by telling us about your journey and really anything you think will help our listeners to understand the context for which you guys will be speaking.
Sure, I'll start. My name is Gloria. I am one of the co-founders of Initialview. We'll talk about Initialview in a minute here. I grew up in the Seattle area. I studied psychology at Wellesley College, then moved on and got my EDM at Harvard. My career started in education, primarily in special ed and ESL. And then I pivoted into ed tech, which allows me to still have a lot of interaction with students, which I love, but also enables me to be a little bit more innovative and creative in the world of education, which I also enjoy a lot.
Awesome. Terry?
So I grew up in Atlanta and went to public high school here in Atlanta, and then for college I went to UVA up in Virginia, and then I spent a little bit of time. I spent a lot of my adult life kind of outside of the U.S. I was in Japan first for 3 years, then I came back for law school, and I did that at Michigan, so 3 great years in Ann Arbor, and then when I went back to Asia, but this time to China. And started the study in Chinese, switched from Japanese to Chinese, and also began my legal career. And I was a corporate lawyer first in Hong Kong, then in New York, and then back in Beijing. And one of those times right before I was a lawyer, but I was studying Chinese in China, kind of wrapped up my time there. And it just so happened that I met someone who was an educator who was working with students in China, and that was of course Gloria. And so the two of us we met in Beijing. Not many people think of Beijing as being this romantic city, but we still see it like that even now that we're 3 years removed from having lived there for 12 years. But we met there and got married. And when Gloria married me, she thought she was marrying a lawyer. We gave that lifestyle a chance for some years, and then decided that it was time to try something else. And Gloria was gracious to think, okay, this is an okay idea that you have, entrepreneurial idea, and that we're gonna have you quit your law job, and I'm gonna come join you as the true co-partner in this. We were already co-partners in the Crawford family. Now we're co-partners in Initialview. And so we run for now 12 years, or I think we've been running Initialview as a couple, and we are the two. I mean, I'm ostensibly the CEO and she's the COO. And in some ways that accurately describes how we see our roles within the company. But we of course manage it together and have a lot of fun running it together, and of course it is for both of us, it's a major life achievement to be able to do Initialview together, to run Initialview together, to serve students and parents and admissions officers with the platform that we have.
Awesome. So if the name Initialview sounds somewhat familiar, regular listeners may know Susan did about a 3-minute overview on Initialview on episode 299, but we've got the founders here. So we're going to ask you to do a little deeper dive and tell us what Initialview is and how and why you started it.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, when I said I pivoted into ed tech, I kind of got pulled into this by my husband. And he just happened to have a lot of entrepreneurial ideas, and he would see a lot of problems and want to solve them. And one of the problems that he saw as a lawyer, he was involved in some hiring, and he would see these beautiful resumes, and people come to that first interview and very quickly, within 30 seconds, be able to ascertain this is not worth a full conversation, but needed to have that full conversation. There was a lot of resource intensive time that was wasted. And so he was thinking there's got to be a better way, some kind of screening process or something we live in a digital age. There must be a way to use technology to save a lot of people time and to be able to get a quick glimpse, but a real glimpse of a person and their conversation ability, their engagement, their personality, things like that. And it just happened that at the same time that he was having this idea, a good friend who you all have heard from probably, Rick Clark at Georgia Tech, was relaying that the world of admissions was dealing with a problem of authenticity, of language proficiency, of fraud. And so we kind of fell into admissions where Georgia Tech's faculty were saying there are students here that we are wondering why they're here. How did they get here? They are not participating in class. But the admissions office would look back on the file and say, everything on here adds up. they, we can check the boxes, they're admissible. And so we started saying, well, let's just have a conversation with them. So in the very beginning, it was literally Terry with a video camera interviewing students in China. People would come into the office, do this unscripted conversation, record it, and we sent it to Georgia Tech and said, what do you think? And thanks to them and a lot of their input and feedback, we basically were able to create a platform that works where a student is able to have a full conversation. It's usually about 15 minutes long, unscripted, unedited. But we present it to admissions office where there's a platform, really easy for them to click through. They don't have to sit and listen to the whole 15 minutes unless they really want to. And they can have a very quick look, an initial view of the student. And so that's how it was born. We kind of were at the right place at the right time because these students who did the first pilot, they realized that in order for them to kind of prove their admissibility, they needed to do this. But they found that given that it wasn't a test, they were able to be genuine, and they wanted to be able to send that to other admissions offices. So that's kind of how we grew.
Anything you want to add to that, Terry?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting thinking about kind of how things take hold in the admissions world. And of course, it typically starts with one school having some need, having a close relationship with someone that has maybe technical resources or some other specialty that might not be necessarily within an admissions office. And they use that, and then that becomes a success case, a pilot to point to. And one, because of this dynamic where the admissions officers had this need and then students started doing it, but it became a magnet for the top students. And then we basically said, like, look, we'll send it to as many schools as you want to. And so then the students became the evangelists for what we were doing. And then more admissions officers started to see it. And then they realized, oh, other schools were doing this too. And it's very, very important in the admissions world for schools to see other schools doing it. Like, it's very hard to get first adopters, but once you get first adopters, it can grow very quickly. And what happened was just these students, and again, this is all kind of us in hindsight, we realized this, but it became a tool that attracted the top students. And it was exactly what faculty were talking about. They weren't necessarily saying so much, oh, we want people with a good test score, because colleges could go back to admission files and realize, like, oh, these students have great test scores. They look great, but there's something missing. And what it captured was that these are students who are ready to come to college in the U.S. and to engage. And that is really what faculty want. They want students who are not even necessarily perfect. I mean, not even ones that have all the right answers, but students that are willing to come and to be very excited. And just because of the dynamic of the way we started, we attracted the top students, and then it became so easy for faculty to be like, I can imagine this kid in my classroom. That at the end of Georgia Tech's the first adopter, and we got a few more schools really quickly. And then by the end of the first cycle, we had about 50 colleges that were telling students that they would accept this interview. And by then it was essentially just, off to the races, where we had to manage that. We had to, of course, build up the technical system. We had to figure out ways to scale these interviews to deal with quality control. But that was the reason we were able to. That was the cycle that we kind of kicked off. And again, it was just by dumb luck, but it was really fascinating. And I would encourage anyone, as they're thinking about what kind of tools or services, do I use, is to really kind of take the approach of the top students that were kind of the first ones, because they didn't see it. They didn't look around and think, oh, this is something that no one else is doing, and therefore I shouldn't do it. They were kind of risk takers, and they wanted something that would help set themselves apart. And I kind of think anyone, just as you're going through life, you should kind of be thinking about that as you're assessing the tools that you might use. So that's a the kind of what got us to year 5 or year 6 of Initial View.
Well, the interesting thing is, I came from the boarding school world, and the boarding school world pretty much just mimics the college world, but we're usually like 18 months behind. And just when I was leaving the boarding school world, but I was still going to some conferences, like this Initial View came out of nowhere. And it was to the point where pretty much everybody was using Initial View to screen, for international applicants coming from places where there'd been a history of some misrepresentation. And every school had experienced that. I know I had experienced that. People get to your school and you realize that maybe somebody else submitted the writing for them or something
Right.
like that, because there's no way that person could have crushed it and presented the material that they did. And then they get here and they're struggling with speech. So just to get into the minutia a little bit more. So is it that they can discern how well a person's grasp of English that they're looking for, or is it more the questions suss out how well they can think on their feet? Or is it other things? Like what is it that colleges told you they found very valuable?
I think at the very beginning, it was about verifying the rest of the application, right? And just what you said, being misrepresented, consultants, agents, whoever was involved in the process were writing the whole application. And so a lot of it was just, are you really who you said you were on paper?
Mm-hmm.
But the faculty complaints were things like, this student can't participate. I feel like I have to dumb down class. And so English proficiency became kind of the big question that everybody had. So I'll be honest, our interviews have kind of evolved over the years. That first year, we were very much about, okay, can you answer a second tier question? Because we're going to assume that you got prepped for the first tier question. So you can answer, what do you want to study in the future? You can kind of say, I love math. But can you answer that second tier? Can you drill down a little bit? What kind of math are you studying right now? What about math interests you? Have you been able to do any cool, research related to math? How do you use math in your daily life? That type of thing. Can they follow that through? After a couple years, what admissions officers realize is I'm getting a lot more information than English from this interview. I'm getting, the context of what type of school they were in, what type of city or country they live in, what resources did they have. I'm getting context on what an extracurricular activity actually means. Were you in Model UN as a participant, or were you leading the charge and want to solve all global issues now? So that type of thing became much more interesting than checking the box of English proficiency. So what happened for us as we trained our interviewers, we were saying, Terry used to have a phrase, being a lawyer in a previous life, he would say, okay, this is like a gentle cross-examination. We're not putting them on the spot here, but we are trying to get at how deep can you go? And so much more than just a back and forth of question, answer. It became much more, can you have a dialogue? Can you think on your feet? Can we go back and forth? Can the admission officer imagine you taking advantage of office hours? Can they imagine you being in a classroom and you're collaborating? You're actually working with a group of students as opposed to just sitting in the back and listening to the professor. So yes, in the beginning, very much about English verification, English proficiency verification. Now much more about engagement. Can I imagine you on campus thriving and flourishing?
Before Initial View was around, what we did on the boarding school side, we used to really prioritize people that did an on-site visit, that visited us. And we used to require them to go into the conference room and do a 30-minute writing sample. Like they wouldn't get the prompt until they arrived. So and that was actually pretty effective because you can't falsify somebody else's writing in there. Did you guys ever look at having a written component as well? I mean, you have people there, you're capturing the oral. Why not also capture something in writing as well? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, there were admissions officers that said, "This is great. We're also concerned about their writing," and so we did add a writing prompt component, and it's a 20-minute open-ended prompt with hundreds of prompts that we picked from for this, but the student can't pick, and it's anyone can respond to these prompts. They're not tricky prompts. They're more kind of creative writing type prompts. But what it does is it does allow a student to show that they can craft a sentence and form a paragraph, and that maybe they can be a little bit creative on the spot as well. Admission officers never look at these. They're not graded. They don't look at them as though, oh, this has to be, it's not a grammar test, but it is just one more way to confirm. And of course, what we tell admissions officers, we say, look, you really can't trust any other piece of writing that you get. This is the only piece of writing that you can get where you know that it's been done by the student themselves. And so that's really valuable. And so we did add that to it. And there are many admissions officers tell us that some will kind of jokingly say that the writing sample is even more important than the interview because they're just so desperate to get some evidence that they feel that it's authentic or that it's an indication of what their literary abilities are in real life.
And I know when we met over lunch, you talked about how your interviews can be like tagged and sort of broken down into segments in case someone doesn't want to watch the whole 15-minute. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, that was kind of the innovation that kicked this off. And you have to, put quotes around it. But up until we were trying to make these interviews work, people would say, well, how are you going to how are you going to scale these? Like, oh, you must ask the same questions every time, and someone kind of reads off the questions and then they answer. The problem with that is that is not authentic, and it is something where it kind of fits in this category of, oh, this is a test that I can game. So I'm going to go learn what the questions are. I'm going to try and memorize the quote unquote right answer. So you can imagine in that context, like very quickly, these interviews just cease to matter because it's just another tool. It's just another part of the application process that students are trying to game, and they'll hire advisors to tell them the questions, and then they'll just kind of practice those questions ad nauseum, and then the interview is boring. So what we thought was like, no, it's got to be, as Gloria said, this phrase that we use internally all the time, it's got to be a gentle cross-examination. So it has to be back and forth, and the student, well, of course they can, I mean, it's about the student. The student's talking about themselves. So on some level, they're experts on what they're talking about, but they're not going to know the questions that are going to come. And that is very, very important because that is what ensures the authenticity. That is what faculty want to see. And that is critical. But your point is right, is that like, let's pretend, when we first did that was kind of, we had this video file and we had to deal technically with how do we kind of get this on off of our servers in China onto servers in the US. And technically that was a big hurdle. And when we figured it out, we're like, hey, look, Georgia Tech, this is so great. Georgia Tech was like, we have at that time, over 1,000, they have many more now, but over 1,000 applicants from China. How can you expect us to watch all these videos? And so we then kind of went back with these video files, and we thought like, oh, maybe we can go back and we can actually tag the questions that are asked, and we can create a user interface where the video is right there, but then the questions are displayed next to it, and the questions are tagged. And so really, you kind of pull up the interview, and it can be about any type of topic, but you can see what the topics are because we've tagged the questions on the right side of the video, and that so very quickly you can kind of click on those to jump around the video if you're the admissions officer and you want to review it and decide, hey, we want to kind of zone in on this question when they're talking about robotics. The final piece, and this was something we didn't come up with until even a few years later, we gave the students, so students get to see this interview. They can't control it, but they get to see it before they send it to colleges. And when they see it, we allow them to pick one of those questions that we've tagged and to mark it as a notable. And that's just the students are highlighting what they want admission officers to see. And so then this is gold for admissions officers. I mean, it's gold for students too, because students are kind of displaying what they're most proud of. Admission officers, when they receive this, they can go right to that notable question. And literally it's in 30 seconds. You have a sense, okay, is this a student that we want to learn more about? We want to spend more time on, or maybe do we already know this is probably not going to work for our institution? The student's going to, will be likely be successful at some institution, but still, it's a way that admission officers can really quickly get to the heart of the matter, and that's, is this a student that we can imagine really engaging on our campus? And it really is that format, that kind of UI UX, that tagging of questions, that then made it work for colleges like Georgia Tech that has thousands of applicants from China, and of course now we're not just China, we're international students as well. That allowed them to think, okay, this is something that at scale we can use to make decisions about applicants.
And about how many people, colleges, would you use Initialview now?
We send interviews to hundreds of, probably, I think it's up to 400 now, institutions. So a lot of colleges use it. And the development of technology and innovation has really improved, even in the time that we've existed, improved the process for the admissions officer. In the beginning, the reason why Georgia Tech said, oh my goodness, I can't have 15-minute files for every student, partially was because of the way that the applications were coming in and needing to find this extra link to put in. Now, because of all these improvements of, you may have heard of Slate, these reading software options that really put everything in the file really easy, it helps admissions officers to realize how quickly they can ascertain something and may be able to speed up their review just because they're able to listen. You've probably heard, those of you listening on the podcast, how much time do admissions officers actually have to review files? Isn't it just 6 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes? And if the interview is 15 minutes, how could they possibly listen? I think in the beginning, our thought was okay, they can just listen to 30 seconds or a minute. But now, because of the way that the file is there, we hear from admissions officers we'll just start playing. If we see the file there, we're going to click play and have it in the background while we're reading. And so it actually speeds up their reading. It brings their application to life. They're reading the essay or they're looking at the extracurriculars and they realize oh, I'm hearing him talk about debate, or I'm hearing her talk about her, project that she was only able to write 150 characters about. And so it really, has moved in a direction that we didn't even expect. And I think that there are some parents, I'm a parent of a 17-year-old, so I get it. Some parents and some counselors who are still stuck in, admissions 20 years ago, or maybe when we were applying to college, that was how it was. I think the world has changed and shifted, and we've been kind of privileged to be able to sit in this spot and see it happen before our eyes and feel yay, we're finally getting at the heart of an applicant and a heart of a student by giving them this opportunity. It used to be where we would pray and hope that we could get an alumni interview, right? And now students have an option and an opportunity to be able to just present themselves in this way.
Friends, this completes the first half. I hope you'll join us next week for the second part. On Thursday's episode, Julie and I will discuss an article called Ditch the Degree. Many employers are just fine with that, by Susan Milligan and Lauren Camera of U.S. News. Lisa and I will answer a SpeakPipe question from an anonymous listener who wants to major in biology, but she's been playing piano since age 4 and wants to know if she should submit an art supplement. And our interviews with Allison Merzel will continue. Former grad school admission officer at Ohio State and currently an independent college counselor in Ohio, Allison will help us to understand the challenges Jewish students face on college campuses and how to know if a college is a safe space for Jewish students and how to support Jewish students. And this is part 2 of 3. And for our college spotlight, Lisa recently visited University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and she'll be helping us to understand another hidden gem, UNC Wilmington. And it's part 2 of 2. And friends, remember, college is not a prize to be won. It is a match to be made. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. if you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.